G'day everybody, Spud here from Spud's Games. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today's video, I'm going to be running you through one of my favourite consoles of all time, the Sega Game Gear. Let's go. So before we kick off the video, I just want to give a big shout out to everyone who subscribed to my channel. It's been a little bit overwhelming. I think it's up to nearly 60 subscribers, so I'm not even sure I know 60 people in my day-to-day life. So big thank you to everyone, and if you want to see more videos, I suppose keep subscribing and keep looking out, because I do plan on making some more videos. So moving on to why we're here, the Sega Game Gear. Now for me, growing up, there's a bit of there's a very strong nostalgic connection to the Sega Game Gear. It was the first handheld console I ever owned. And back in the day, there was a lot of people who had Game Boys. Now, I was never a fan of Nintendo. I actually never owned a Nintendo console up until I was, I'm not sure what age, but it was the Nintendo Wii. That's the first outright Nintendo console I ever bought. Growing up, I had Commodore 64, then migrated onto the Sega Master System, the Mega Drive. And then from the Mega Drive, I basically took a big jump up to the PlayStation 1, and then it's sort of been PlayStation right through to the present day, along with a little bit of Xbox here and there. But the Sega Game Gear was my first handheld console, and the reason why I got it was my brother actually owned a Game Boy, and he's a little bit younger than I am, but his birthday falls in August and mine falls in November. So for his birthday, he got a Game Boy, and it really irked me the way everybody loved, hanging around him because he had a Game Boy. Even I didn't mind playing the Game Boy, but I really wanted something to stand out. And I was scrolling through a catalogue one day, and up jumped the Sega Game Gear. And for me, the handheld and the colour really made me want to buy this. So I went straight to Mum and Dad and said, "This is what I want for my birthday or Christmas." And sure enough, they obliged, and when I got that, everyone sort of forgot about the Game Boy and they moved over to the Sega Game Gear. And by Christmas and the next round of birthdays, everyone that I knew was sort of migrating off the Game Boy over to the Game Gear, and it felt really good that I was the kickoff for that, or the catalyst for that that change. So by the end of it, I knew at least 3 or 4 people that had Sega Game Gears. So it gave me a really nice feeling, and as I said, because it was my first handheld console, I have really fond memories, especially around the 4-in-1 cartridge. That in Australia, that's what it was delivered with mainly. There was 2 versions I'm aware of that were released in Australia, but the one with the 4-in-1 cart was certainly the most available throughout Australia. So in my collection, I have a few different consoles. I have three consoles all up. One does have the McWill mod, which I'll run you guys through later on, because it has a couple of really handy features other than just a nice screen. I have about 70 odd games. The bulk of them are loose cartridges, as you can see here, but there is a good 20 odd, 25 games I think that are fully boxed with instructions. So they're very hard to come by. I'm not sure about everywhere else in the world, but in Australia particularly, Game Gear games are very hard to come by, especially boxed. So to have 20 fully boxed games is a real highlight for my collection. So let's get stuck into talking about the consoles. So we'll address the elephant in the room to start with, and that's the buying guide for Sega Game Gears and the issues around capacitors. Now, I can almost certainly guarantee you that any Game Gear that you pick up or you see advertised, unless it's had the capacitors changed, then it's not going to work properly, if at all. The reason for this is when the Sega Game Gear was produced, there was a worldwide issue with the quality of the capacitors. It just didn't affect the Game Gear, it affected a lot of other electronic devices around that time as well. Unfortunately, the Game Gear seemed to have suffered probably the most in regards to game consoles, to the fact that has been no Game Gear bundle that I picked up where the console, it works straight away without it having its capacitors changed. So as unfortunate it is, the fix is quite simple, but in the same breath, it is also quite frustrating because changing the capacitors doesn't always fix the issue. So while changing the capacitors may fix some of the issues, and in my estimation, it would probably fix 50% of the console straight off. So just by changing the capacitors, then there's a good 50% chance that you'll successfully rescue the console itself. But the leaking capacitors also have other issues. So the electrolytic fluid that leaks out of the capacitors is quite corrosive. So not only does the capacitor not work, all the components around it then have a chance that they're not going to work either, because the electrolytic fluid has leaked into them or around them and either ruin the component itself or ruin the electric traces around the circuit board. Once it gets to this stage, it's very, very difficult to fault find. As I said before, my success rate is only about 50% of rescuing Sega Game Gear consoles. Now that's between probably issues with the screens on top of the capacitors, because they do suffer issues with the screens as well, and as well as the issues surrounding the electrolytic fluid leaking across the board and causing more issues other than just faulty capacitors. Now, for those of you who don't believe me, regarding the 50% success rate of repairing Game Gears, I recently took a big box of faulty Game Gears to the tip. But before I did that, I actually stripped them down for what components I could use. So in my collection, you can see I've got 3 boxed Game Gears. Over the period that I've been collecting, I've probably sold, at a guess, probably 7 to 10 Game Gears on eBay or through friends. So all up, I'm guessing I've probably had 10 successful consoles throughout the days of my collecting. But when I did the teardown, I don't know if you can see that there, but this is just the little D-pad from one of the Game Gears that didn't make it. And I have 12 of those. So I have 12 D-pad buttons that didn't make the cut across the faulty Game Gears that I just couldn't repair. Now, keeping in mind, I don't go right into repairing the Game Gear. I change the capacitors, I give the board a clean, I will test some other components, and I will look at the screen. And if I think it's beyond repair or it's just not worth the time, then it gets turfed, it gets stripped down. I might save the plastic protector screen, I'll save the battery covers, I'll save some buttons, I'll save some rubbers that the little D-pad and the other buttons use. But other than that, the circuit board, I will save some cases as well if they're in good condition, but the circuit board itself and whatnot, it just gets turfed. Because for me, it just takes up room and it's just a real waste of time trying to fault find these. So I do limit myself into what I actually pay for a Game Gear bundle, knowing the chances are it's not going to work, and the amount of time that I have to spend repairing it and getting it up to scratch, and even the chances are that it's beyond repair are just not worth the risk sometimes. So I limit my bundles to quite cheap. That's just something I do. I'm not trying to lowball anyone, but because of the nature of the Game Gear and the issues they have, then for me it's just not worth going above what I'm willing to pay. So let's quickly talk about the McWill modification and what it is. So the McWill mod, or the McWill screen modification, is essentially ripping out the old TFT LCD screen that the Game Gear comes with and replacing it with a more modern LCD. Now, for me, I'm quite proficient with the soldering iron. You know, I don't have really any issues soldering, so for me the difficulty was around a 5 or a 6 out of 10. But if you're not proficient with the soldering iron and you don't really have experience with the soldering iron, then the difficulty gets much higher really quickly. So it is a steep learning curve if you're not really good with the soldering iron. If you have changed the capacitors in a Game Gear and you found that difficult, then I'd probably steer clear of doing the McWill modification, because the difficulty on top of the capacitors is quite substantial. So if you weren't comfortable doing that, then you certainly won't be comfortable doing the McWill modification, mainly because there are some fine soldering points you need to get to, and if you use too much heat, if you put too much solder on, it can get really messy really quickly. So if you're not proficient, then I'd probably steer clear of it and just stick with the existing old LCD screen, just for not risking the damage to it, the new screen, because the McWill screen is not cheap, especially shipped to Australia, and you also risk damaging your Game Gear if it's working perfectly fine. So I wouldn't do it if I didn't have the skills, but you know, I'm certainly not recommending not to do it. Give it a shot if you think you can do it, but if it starts getting too difficult, then I'd suggest just walking away from it, because you don't want to ruin two things there, which are both quite expensive. Now, for those of you who wanted to see what the difference was between a McWill screen and the standard LCD screen, here's what we're looking at. So the one on the left is obviously the McWill screen. Same game, cool spot. Both have had their capacitors changed, both work fine, but as you can see, the difference with the McWill screen and the difference there of the standard LCD screen. The other thing I should note as well when we're looking at the McWill modification is the ability to add a VGA port to output the screen to a PC CRT that has a VGA input, or to something like an LCD, or an older LCD screen that has a VGA input. Or what I do is I actually input it into my OSSC Upscaler, which just effectively is a line doubler, and it also does a few other cool features. And once I added it, the VGA port into the Game Gear, feed it through the OSSC, the result I get on my brand new 4K 120Hz TV is just fantastic. It actually makes me, well, I don't have a Master System collection because of it. I just double up on the Game Gear games and the Master System converter. So I will run you through when I'm going through some games. I'll show you how that looks on the LCD screen, but I thought I'd just mention it as well as part of the McWill modification. They do give you the plug, the 15-pin connector, and the instructions to add in a VGA out as well. So before we move on to games in my collection that I have, I'm going to talk about the accessories that I keep as well. Now, there are far more accessories than what I have here. Some are quite useless, but the ones that I have and I keep are the ones that I use and I find quite handy to have. So the first one, and you aim a Game Gear, you're going to need one of these. It's the power pack. It's the same power pack as a Sega Master System, I think 1 uses as well, so it doesn't really matter which one you use, but I like to keep them genuine, so I have a genuine Sega Game Gear power pack. You don't really want to use batteries with the Game Gear. They don't last very long, to tell you the truth. You might only get an hour or two out of it, but that's I always play mine with the power pack plugged in as well, and that way, if I forget to take the batteries out, I don't like keeping the batteries in because the risk of battery leakage, then I don't have, that sort of gets rid of that worry that I have that, you know, I don't need to keep taking batteries in and out of the console. So if you own a Game Gear, you're going to need one of these power packs as well, whether you use a Master System one or a third-party one, whatever, but definitely recommend you need one of these. The other thing, other one I use just for portability is, I've touched on it before, is the official Game Gear portable battery pack. Now, if you do find these in the wild, your chances are, or I can guarantee you, they won't work, they won't charge up. The battery cell inside them would have dried up long ago. They wouldn't have been charged for 20 years, so it's not going to work. Now, I modified mine, or I actually didn't modify it, it's more of a repair. I put a newer battery in there, a lithium ion battery in there, which for all the research I've done, the charging circuit does work fine with it. It does take a long time to charge up. Generally, I'll charge it up overnight, but it will give me between 45 minutes and an hour of gameplay. So pretty much the same as what the AAA batteries in the back of the console will. But you know, if I'm looking for just a quick game or testing a game or along those lines, then the battery pack is the way to go. And it's nice that I was able to get a boxed version of it as well with a manual and whatnot. The other one I touched on before is the Master Gear converter I have here. I think this is actually a third-party one, but Sega did sell first-party ones as well, but they all work the same. They clip into the cartridge slot, and then they have, actually I'll take one out of the box here for you and show you what it looks like. So that's it there. There's a bit at the back here that just slots in where a cartridge would normally slot, so that just slots in there. And then you've got your big wide opening here for where your Master System cartridge would fit in. The Game Gear itself does a really good job of playing Master System games, so you won't have any issues there. I don't know if there are any issues with any particular Master System games that can't play on the Game Gear. I haven't come across any, so I always recommend that you grab one of these as well, just for testing, or if you have a Master System collection. grab one of these because you can play all your Master System games portably with the Sega Game Gear. The other one too, if you're struggling with your eyes, there's a magnifier. I use this sometimes at night, but it's essentially similar to the Game Boy magnifier. It just clips onto the top of the console and it magnifies the screen to make it appear bigger than what it actually is. So I have that in my collection as well, and I use that a little bit. The other one I have is the Game Genie. For games I'm struggling with, or I can't get to the end of, or I can't finish, then I'm not going to lie to you, I cheat and I throw the Game Genie in, which helps out with the game cheats. It gives you more power, makes you faster, all that jazz. So it's preloaded with a heap of different codes, but you can add your own codes in if you wanted to at a later date. So that's it for the accessories I use. As I said, there's a heap more that comes with. There's car, plug-in kits for your car. There's cases. There's carry cases. There's all sorts of things. So, but they're the ones that I keep. I can't keep. I've had more than that. Oh, the other one I forgot to mention, the TV tuner. Now I have multiple TV tuners in my collection, but at the end of the day, the TV tuner, one, is analog, doesn't work in Australia anymore, so I can't pick up any channels. And two, I use my Game Gear with the McWill screen. So once you do that McWill mod, the TV tuner won't work anymore. It just doesn't display anything. So it's pretty useless. It doesn't show TV channels and it doesn't work with the McWill mod. It does have one very, 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 very small positive. If you don't do the modification and you keep your Game Gear stock, and it will accept the tuner card, and it does give you the snow screen, etc. Although you can't watch any TV with it, it does have an AV jack. So it will allow you to plug in something, a composite signal, so whether it's a different console, say a Saturn or a PlayStation 1 or whatnot, it will accept an AV in, composite AV in, and it will display it on your Game Gear. It is a horrible display. It is horrible. It's barely legible, but it does work. So that's probably the only reason I would keep it in my collection, and it's just not enough for me to keep it in my collection, to tell you the truth. I'm not going to play, a Sega Saturn game on a Sega Game Gear. That would be absolutely pointless, considering I've got this beauty Bang & Olufsen CRT behind me, and I've also got the brand spanking new TV over there. So that's the reason why I don't have them in my collection. But by all means, I mean, they fetch good money, the TV tuners, so I can understand why people do hang on to them. But for me, an absolutely useless accessory these days, and there's no point having it in my collection. So next up, let's talk about the games for the Sega Game Gear. Now, all up, I think there were about 350 odd Game Gear games released throughout Japan and the rest of the world. Of those, I think there was only about 70 or 80 of them that were Sega Game Gear exclusive. So there was a lot of crossover between Sega Master System games and Sega Game Gear games. Now, that's not to say when the Master System game was ported to the Game Gear that they are exactly the same game. A lot of the times they're not. When I say they're not, that they are the same game, but they might have things like different music or different colors. They obviously have different sprites being different resolutions. So there were subtle changes between them, as any ports are, but there was probably 3/4 of the Game Gear collection that you could then, or you could also get on the Sega Master System. So that's why having that Game Gear Master System converter is important. Now, for me personally, growing up when I had my Game Gear, we didn't have a huge amount of money, so I didn't have a lot of games at the time. Certainly not box games. I was like any young guy back then. Got my game all excited, turfed everything out, kept the cartridge in a drawer, and that was about as much as I did with the box. So the box, barely saw the light of day before it hit the bin. These days, with the collections the way they are, everyone wants stuff boxed. So going back and finding boxed Game Gear games has been a real highlight. Very difficult to come by here in Australia. I'm not sure about the rest of the world, but I would say the 200 odd Game Gear games that I've picked up throughout the collections that I've picked up, I don't think I've sold any box games. So these are all, these are all the ones that I've picked up. So the ratio to box to unboxed for Game Gear games, I'm assuming it'd be similar for Game Boy games, any games around that time. Very difficult to come by fully boxed with instructions, etc. So to have 20 out of the 70 odd games that I've got in my collection boxed, you know, it makes me proud to have these in my collection. So moving on to loose games. So for most of us who collect Game Gear games, this is the way you find them, loose. Very hard to find them boxed, so you just make do with what you find for your collection. And really, there's no harm in keeping loose games. Especially with Game Gear games, they don't take up much room. But I always like to ensure that my Game Gear games that are loose always have the Game Gear cover on them. I found games that don't have the covers with them, or I pick up a bundle where all the covers are missing. The games don't tend to work as well as a bundle who's someone who's kept the cases on them. And I'm assuming it's similar for Game Boy as well. So always look for games which have the Game Gear case included with them. I just find them in much better condition. So as for the storage box I've got here, no, I didn't make it up. This box was actually part of an Amiga collection that I picked up, and it housed all the freeware or the shareware discs that were released with the Amiga magazines. I kept the ones that had full games on them, but any game or any discs that were just demos and whatnot, I ended up selling them off or giving them to friends who collected Amiga. So, but I utilised the box because I found that the Game Gear games actually fit nice and neatly into it. So it gives me somewhere nice and neat to store the cartridges as well. It also gives me a bit of room to store extra manuals and whatnot. So nice, handy, compact space. Each row, you can see there, houses 12 Game Gear games with the cases on. So all up, you can see 48 games there with the cases on. And there's actually 2 you might not be able to see there that are just loose without the cases. So they're just doubles, those particular ones. I think they may be Japanese games or something like that. I just don't have the cases for them. So all up, there's 50 games in this particular storage case. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to show you through probably my top 3 or 4 Game Gear games. Yes, they may be Master System ports, but I don't have a Master System, so whether you want to treat that as Master System / Game Gear games, you guys can decide. But for me, they're Game Gear games, and what I'll do is I'll actually demonstrate them using my OSSC with the McWill screen and the VGA output. So now we come to my favourite part of the video, choosing the top 5 games to play and show you guys what I think are the best or the top 5 games that I have in my collection. And it's a tough choice because there was so many games that I used to play on Master System when I had one, as well as the Game Gear. So let's get stuck into it. And what I'll do as well is while I'm playing this, I'll run you through my OSSC setup as well, because I will play all these games on my big TV. So before we do the games, I'm just going to quickly run you through the OSSC setup with the big screen TV. I've mentioned this before, but the model I think is a Sony X9000H 4K 120Hz TV. And we're going to be running the Game Gear through an OSSC via its VGA input. So we need to make sure the McWill model, the screen, the contrast is set all the way up. This will make sure that first of all, the screen on the Game Gear will appear. This is to show you guys there's no magic trickery or anything like that. So we'll just go ahead and turn the Game Gear on utilising the battery pack that I repaired. As you can see there, I think we're playing Sonic Chaos. So that's just operating normally via the McWill screen on the Game Gear itself. Now, when we adjust the contrast button on the side all the way down, it will actually switch over to VGA. So I'll just do that now, hopefully without knocking the Game Gear over. And you'll see there the sound's playing, but there's nothing on the screen. So what I will do now is I will make sure that the correct setting is on the OSSC, which is AV3. And there we go. So as you can see there, it's a really nice picture. I've got Scanlines set up there through the OSSC. It's not coming through via the McWill mod, but by the OSSC. And as you can see, it's quite vibrant, quite colourful, and it's really easy to play, or really easy to view. So that's how I like to play my Game Gear, and you can see the results there are quite good. Now, I'll put the settings of my OSSC into the comments of the video, so you can copy the settings if you want, if you're thinking of doing the same. So now let's get into the top 5 games. So here we are talking about my top 5 games in my Sega Game Gear collection. Like the PS2 video, I'm not going to be talking about the best Game Gear games overall. I don't own every single Game Gear game, so if I don't have it, then it's not going to make the cut. I'm only going to talk about what I have in my collection. So, coming in at number 5, Castle of Illusion, starring Mickey Mouse. Now, this, for me, the reason why it's in the top 5 is mainly nostalgic. So, I obviously had a Master System growing up, and the transition over to Game Gear, this was one of the few games that I did buy because I enjoyed it so much on the Master System. I actually finished it on the Master System. I never got around to finishing it on the Game Gear as well. But for those who haven't played it, it's a typical Disney game, platformer, very colourful, very good controls. And if you haven't played it before, there was a couple in the series. There's Castle of Illusion, Land of Illusion. So there's a few to the series. Give them a shot. You certainly won't regret it. So number 5, Castle of Illusion starring Mickey Mouse. Righto, so coming in at number 4. This is gonna divide a few people because some people hated this game, some people love this game. I actually enjoyed it. Once again, it's a game that I owned when I first bought a Game Gear. So for me, it has that nostalgic value. And that is Axe Battler. Now that's Axe spelled AX, not AXE. And as you would expect, Axe Battler is a spin-off from Golden Axe. It's not your traditional Golden Axe game, where it's pretty much just a side-scrolling beat-em-up game. This one is actually, it does have that element, side-scrolling beat-em-up, but it also touches on some RPG elements as well. You've got an overworld map, you've got monsters that, or creatures that jump out when you're traveling through that map. Look, it's not the most polished game by any stretch of the imagination, and yet they could have done it better. But for me, I just really enjoyed it, that they gave it a shot, and it's just something different. As before, when I was talking about the game Genie and the cheats, this is where I use it on Axe Battler. The hit detection isn't great, but the rest of the controls are good. It's really colourful, the game, and overall, I actually really enjoy playing it. I've never finished it. I will get around to finishing it one day, but for me, Axe Battler sits in at number 4 on my my favourite Game Gear games that I have in my collection. So coming in at number 3 on my list, probably no surprise to anyone because if you've watched the video throughout, you would have seen me testing on it quite a bit, and that's Outrun. I grew up having a Commodore 64, I have had Sega Master Systems, I've had an Amiga. So Outrun for me was just the whole Outrun, the whole Outrun range is just, it's been a staple for me throughout my games. So, and it's no different from the Game Gear. The Game Gear port I think is fantastic. Just like any game, Outrun game, the music is great. It's colourful, the controls are really easy, or not easy, but really smooth. And it's what you would expect from a good Outrun game. So if you enjoy driving games and you have a Game Gear, then I recommend you get Outrun. So coming in at number 2 on the list of my favourite Game Gear games on my collection is, and there's probably no surprise, Shinobi 2. I spent many hours playing this game when I was younger. I love the Shinobi series. For those who don't know what the Shinobi series is, I'm assuming most people would, but it's essentially a side-scrolling ninja game. This particular game, you can be 5 ninjas, and you need to utilise those 5 ninjas to get you through most levels. You can't just be one type of ninja to get you through. You do rely on the features of different ninjas, and they're just colour-coded. It's not too difficult, but it's difficult enough to sometimes get you frustrated. The good thing is too, it has a continue as well, so you're not constantly always starting from scratch again. So if you're a fan of the Shinobi series, and if you're a fan of the Game Gear, then it rates highly pretty much everywhere. So I recommend you give Shinobi 2 a good go, and it features at number 2 on my favourite Game Gear games in my collection. So number 1, what could be number 1? What could be number 1? So number 1 for me, and if you're a Sega fan, it's probably no surprise that this particular series of game is number 1 for me on the Game Gear. It is a Sonic game, and you know, Sonic's probably my favourite series of all time throughout all games, gaming consoles, up until recently of course, but all the retro ones that the Sonic was available on, then Sonic was always a go-to game for me. And for me, Sonic Chaos is for me the #1 game in my collection that I have, and that I play most often. Now, for those of you who haven't played Sonic Chaos before, I think it was maybe available, I don't think it was available on the Master System, but anyway, it's not the first game that Tails was playable in, that was Sonic 2, but it's the first game that Tails, you're able to fly around utilising his tail. So in Sonic 2, he was pretty much just a mirror image of Sonic, let's face it. He did exactly the same thing, he was just an orange fox instead of a blue hedgehog. But in this one, at least it allows you to fly around and get a bit more engagement with the Tails character. As for gameplay, it is very similar to Sonic 3 in gameplay and levels, etc., that you'll find on the Sega Mega Drive. Obviously, the resolutions, etc., the sprites are different, but if you like Sonic 3 and you like the whole Sonic series and you own a Game Gear, then I recommend #1, you give Sonic Chaos a run. So that's it, guys, for my Game Gear video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it didn't go too long. Sorry that I think I've rambled on a little bit. I think this video is going to hit nearly 25 minutes, if not more. But I hope you can tell that I am a Sega fan. I do love my Game Gear. I don't know what it is other than the nostalgia that I love about the Game Gear, but there's just something about it that gets me really excited. Maybe it's because they're so hard to find in the wild working. Well, actually, you'll never find one working, but you know, getting it, repairing it, seeing it work again, you know, it's certainly, I enjoy it. And the Sega Game Gear is one of my favourite consoles, there's no doubt about it. And I hope you guys enjoyed watching this video as much as I did making it. Once again, I'll just say, if you do like the video, subscribe, because I've got a whole collection here of video games to get through, and I do plan on making more videos. So thanks for watching till the end, appreciate it, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks when I reload up my new videos.